Welcome, Chosen X. You awaken in a silence heavy with memory, the room around you softened by an afterglow that feels like both mercy and verdict. You have learned to listen beneath the clamor, to map the small betrayals by their rhythm, to translate smiles into motives and polite phrases into weather patterns that presage storms. For years you cultivated an interior chamber where patience lived, where observation became currency and steadiness transformed into resolve. That quiet was not absence, it was preparation, the deliberate tending of a light meant to illuminate when discretion mattered most. Now that flame asks you to stand differently. You notice how others attempt to shape the narrative around you, how casual cruelty wears the mask of convenience, how accolades for them feel like omissions regarding you. Their assumptions are a soft armor meant to contain you, their language a grid meant to reroute your path. You refuse to be diverted. Instead you allow comprehension to mature into sovereignty. Comprehension is not merely seeing but receiving what is seen without confusion, aligning perception with intention so your steps remain true even when the ground shifts. This moment demands a new syntax for action. You move through conversations as one passes through a library, attentive to margins and footnotes, recognizing the small reveals that accumulate into undeniable patterns. You no longer respond to provocation with echoes, your replies arrive measured, precise, and intentionally lean. Silence has become a sculptural instrument, it shapes what will be said later and conserves energy for the work that matters. There is a sacredness to boundaries now. You erect them not in anger but in clarity, forming an architecture that protects rather than punishes. This architecture allows tenderness to persist while rejecting extraction disguised as request. People who once assumed availability discover that your time is a resource invested with purpose. That recalibration unsettles them because it removes the habit they relied upon. At night you dream of a narrow corridor lit by oil lamps, each flame revealing a fragment of your life you had mistaken for failure. You walk past old thresholds and do not enter, you catalog lessons instead of reactivating old wounds. Each step is deliberate. Each refusal to return loosens the gravity of what had weighed you down. In daylight you notice how your gaze rests longer on horizons, how conversations that once consumed you now slide off like light from a well-polished surface. This season is not mere reaction, it is consecration. What you release is not bitterness but an inventory of what you will not become. In holding this inventory you gain clarity about where your loyalties belong. Those loyalties are oriented toward growth, toward integrity, toward tasks that carry resonance beyond applause. Expect resistance. As you reframe yourself, some relationships will produce static where connection once hummed. There will be attempts to reassert control through subtle guile, theatrical humility, or feigned confusion. Your role is to observe these maneuvers without absorption, to let their predictability become confirmation rather than provocation. In doing so you convert their attempts into data. You are not isolated, you are becoming a presence. Presence does not seek domination, it holds space with intentional gravity. Where presence is practiced, chaos finds a surface on which to break harmlessly. That surface is you made deliberate and compassionate, a kind of living threshold that filters what enters and reroutes what does not serve. Carry this knowledge forward, discernment is a muscle strengthened by practice. Use it to orient decisions, to protect your attention, and to build a life aligned with your essence. The rite of passage you inhabit is quiet but exacting, refining your capacities until they are proportional to the calling you sense beneath your ribs. Keep tending the flame. Soon you will speak and each word will carry luminous truth. You step into a room of reflected intentions, where gestures that once felt warm now reveal their precise choreography. The faces around you carry practiced smiles that fold at the edges like paper, and the air thickens with polite transactions dressed as concern. You have learned to read the interval between words, to notice where attention thins and where motives quicken. That ability is not vengeance. It is a refined instrument that separates true offers from traps. Betrayal arrives not as a single blow but as a series of small reassignments. A line removed from a conversation here, a credit claimed there, an invitation withheld at an angle meant to suggest oversight rather than malice. These cuts are tiny yet cumulative, and they draw a new map of your landscape. The landscape marks where devotion was expected and where emptiness was returned. It is a cartography of tone and omission. You do not respond with theatrical fury. Instead you catalog. Each slight, each false warmth, becomes a record. You file them within an interior archive that is neither cold nor resentful. It is precise. In the archive, a pattern emerges. The people who orbit you are not simply flawed, they are rehearsing roles that keep you small. That recognition changes the geometry of your decisions. What once felt like a shared table now reveals itself as a stage where you were meant to play a supporting part. The revelation brings grief. That grief is honest and uncluttered. It is the bereavement of expectation, the mourning for what you imagined was mutual. Grief gives shape to resolve because it clarifies which bridges are worth building and which are wasted labor. In the pause after grief you consider where your labor was invested and what it yielded. The answer is instructive. Discernment becomes your companion. It teaches you to differentiate between genuine alignment and clever mimicry. Alignment moves with ease and invites reciprocity. Mimicry performs kindness as an act while reserving claim over your work. You learn to accept offers that breathe and decline those that constrict. The measures you adopt are not punitive. They are protective and practical. This is also a moment of emancipation. When you stop mistaking flattery for fellowship, you retrieve time and energy for projects that value you. You redirect efforts toward endeavors that do not require apology for excellence. The liberation is subtle at first. It accrues like light at dawn. Each decision to withhold yourself from draining engagements adds to a cumulative margin of creative space. Some will notice and react with surprise. Their astonishment is not admiration in its pure form. It is the disorientation of those who depended on predictable access to someone they assumed would be constant. Their discomfort sometimes becomes a strategy. They double down on charm or deploy confusion to coax you back into old patterns. Your steadiness matters here. It converts their confusion into evidence rather than enticement. You refine your responses. Where before you might have matched tone to soothe, you now practice clear boundaries spoken with calm authority. You do not explain endlessly. Instead, you articulate a simple yes or no and allow consistency to teach them your limits. Language becomes a sculptor of the new field you occupy. People learn not by lectures but by the shape of your actions. At night, the archive is not a tomb. It is a workshop. You revisit exchanges not to relieve pain but to extract clarity. You test hypotheses about character and test the resilience of your new thresholds. This labor is quiet. It is a kind of patient experimentation that yields better questions about trust and contribution. In public they might still perform their applause, offering gestures that once impressed and now ring hollow. You accept their niceties with neutral grace and move with intention toward places that ask for substance rather than surface. Your compass points toward collaborative spaces where mutual respect is visible in both words and deeds. The fracture then is not merely a rupture. It is a clarifying break that reveals the architecture of relation. Once revealed, the architecture can be redesigned. You begin to reframe the terms of engagement. You invite fewer people to your table and invite them more deliberately. The new invitations demand reciprocity by design. This season tests your patience and rewards your fidelity to what truly matters. You are learning to conserve yourself for what is generative. As you do so, your work deepens and the echoes you produce are fuller. The subtle betrayals that once felt like undermining force now function as instruments that tune your sense of where to commit energy. Continue. Let the wound teach rather than harden. Allow the clarity to guide your appointments and your alliances. In this way the fracture becomes the crucible where intention is refined into purpose and betrayal is transmuted into discernment. ChatGPT. You move further into the unfolding silence, the place where revelation doesn't roar but murmurs with precision. Everything around you has shifted. Voices that once drew you closer now sound rehearsed, choreographed to keep you in orbit. You've begun to see beyond tone, into the machinery behind affection. That vision is costly. It strips illusions, exposes scaffolds built from convenience, and leaves you standing in the raw air of recognition. Yet within that exposure there is oxygen, something vital that was missing when you lived confined by the comfort of half-truths. The quiet you inhabit is not withdrawal. It's recalibration. Every pause is a study in intent, every silence an instrument of choice. You have learned that not all presence is connection and not all distance is loss. What remains after illusions dissolve is a rare honesty, a landscape cleared of decoration, ready for cultivation. You walk through it with deliberate pace, feeling how the ground beneath you holds both history and potential. Each step confirms that you are no longer reacting but creating. Patterns appear in retrospect. You see how certain people disguise their dependence as affection, how their admiration required your dimming. They loved your stability only when it buffered their chaos. The moment you withdrew, they called it arrogance. When you spoke truth, they called it cruelty. But you are no longer adjusting your tone for the comfort of those who feed on your moderation. You now understand that peace sustained through suppression is a fragile performance, one that fractures the moment authenticity enters the room. There are nights when exhaustion whispers that detachment would be easier than caring less would simplify everything. But you know detachment is not liberation. It's absence wearing a crown of self-protection. So you choose instead to care differently. You refine empathy into precision, compassion into discernment. You learn to offer understanding without surrendering agency. That choice changes your entire rhythm. It redefines kindness as clarity rather than compliance. In the quiet of early morning, you write notes to yourself, fragments of future truths. You remind yourself that loyalty must be reciprocal, that devotion without recognition curdles into self-erasure. You list what you owe yourself: unbroken sleep, honest work, laughter that doesn't disguise fatigue. You promise not to negotiate your worth in rooms where integrity is considered optional. The promises are small, but they align your spine. When confrontation arrives, it comes disguised as nostalgia. Someone will invoke shared memories, trying to pull you back into the script they preferred. You smile, but your silence has weight now. It is not the silence of fear but of sovereignty. They sense it, even if they cannot name it. The old dynamic collapses under the gravity of your calm. You walk away, not as victor but as witness to your own transformation. Freedom feels unfamiliar at first. The absence of noise reveals your heartbeat in startling clarity. You catch yourself listening for the friction that once filled every room, realizing that peace can feel empty until it becomes natural. The world outside hasn't softened, but you have learned to navigate it with precision, adjusting your course without apology, filtering chaos through your new architecture of stillness. Creativity begins to bloom again, wild and unsupervised. Ideas that once drowned beneath obligation rise to the surface, urgent and luminous. You work with a sense of devotion rather than desperation. You no longer chase validation, you anchor your worth in the quiet certainty of contribution. Each act of creation becomes an offering, not a transaction. As days lengthen, your discernment sharpens further. You recognize sincerity in subtle gestures, the way someone listens without agenda, the pauses that respect rather than exploit vulnerability. Those are your people now, the ones who honor process over performance, who understand that intimacy is measured not by proximity but by presence. You begin to understand that redemption isn't a single moment of forgiveness, it's the sustained practice of choosing truth over comfort. In that choice, you re-enter the world not as the wounded but as the whole. The fractures remain, but they shimmer like veins of gold, evidence of both endurance and artistry. You've become a vessel for your own restoration, carrying light precisely where darkness once rehearsed its lines. You wake before dawn and the air carries a strange equilibrium, stillness, balance between what was and what waits. The walls no longer echo with the voices that once demanded your moderation. You sense that something vast is preparing to unfold, not around you but through you. The ache that used to hum behind your ribs has quieted into focus. Every breath feels like translation, every movement an act of deliberate authorship. You have stepped beyond survival and entered authorship. This is where awareness becomes design. You walk through the city at sunrise, and everything reflects your internal shift. Street lights fade as the sky turns to silver, and for a moment it feels as though the entire world is pausing for your next decision. You move with neither urgency nor hesitation. Each step is a negotiation with destiny, every glance a study in consequence. The people who once anchored you in expectation appear smaller now, their influence diluted by distance. What holds weight are not their judgments but your capacity for stillness under scrutiny. Freedom, you've learned, is not loud. It does not announce itself with rebellion or noise. It arrives as steadiness, as an unspoken refusal to participate in what diminishes you. It reshapes your voice until it resonates from somewhere deeper than approval. When you speak now, even in the simplest exchanges, your words carry a kind of gravity that unsettles pretense. Some mistake gravity for pride, but you know it's clarity. You have distilled your identity to its purest elements: purpose, integrity, endurance. In your solitude, creation begins again. The act of building something new from the ruins of betrayal feels almost sacred. You write, not to explain but to uncover. Each sentence feels like an excavation, brushing away sediment until a truth gleams beneath the dust. You find that pain, when examined without haste, transforms into vocabulary. You use it to construct bridges between silence and understanding. What once wounded you now gives your language depth. As the days lengthen, invitations return. People sense your energy changing and want proximity to it, though they do not always understand why. Some approach with sincerity, others with calculation. You meet both with composure. Connection, you've learned, cannot be forced into symmetry. It grows through mutual recognition, not performance. So you no longer chase resonance, you wait for it. When it arrives, it feels like oxygen rather than transaction. There is temptation to retreat permanently into solitude, to protect the peace you fought to reclaim. But you resist it. Isolation can masquerade as safety, yet it dulls the edges of growth. Instead, you learn to move through the world with boundaries that breathe. You let people in, but not to the center. The center is reserved for truth, for the quiet pulse that reminds you why you began. Each evening you return home and light a single candle. Its flicker becomes a ritual conversation with something beyond understanding. You do not name it faith, but it feels like one. The flame moves as though aware of your thoughts, bending gently each time clarity arrives. In those moments you realize that enlightenment isn't thunderous revelation, it's the daily discipline of staying open despite exhaustion. Memories still visit. They no longer accuse, but they instruct. You see faces that once unsettled you and recognize their purpose. They were catalysts, not curses. They pushed you toward discernment, toward the refusal to abandon yourself for belonging. You whisper a quiet gratitude into the dark, not because the pain was noble but because it was precise. It carved room for understanding that comfort never could. Now, when you walk through crowds, your perception has depth, others don't register. You sense currents beneath casual words, the micro-hesitations in tone, the authenticity or absence in a handshake. You are fluent in the hidden languages of motive. But instead of using that fluency as defense, you use it as direction. It tells you where generosity will thrive and where silence is the wiser gift. You are becoming more than healed. You are attuned. The world no longer feels like a battlefield but a system of frequencies waiting for coherence. You stand in the center, grounded yet expansive, and realize that mastery is not control, it's communion with what is uncontrollable. The dawn breaks again, pale gold across your reflection, and for the first time in years you recognize yourself completely. The awakening was never about them. It was always about you remembering the language of your own light. You stand at the threshold of something that feels like prophecy disguised as routine. The day unfolds as any other, yet underneath its ordinary rhythm hums an unseen current guiding you toward inevitability. The air holds weight, not of dread but of meaning. Every sound, every flicker of shadow seems to signal recognition, as though the universe, after years of observation, has chosen this precise moment to answer you back. You can feel it in your fingertips, a vibration that travels beyond bone, whispering that nothing will return to the way it was. You begin to move, drawn by intuition more than logic. the streets stretch before you in silver-gray quiet, reflecting your own transformation. Somewhere within, a sequence begins to align memory, desire, truth, consequence, each turning like a gear pulling the next. The world itself seems participatory now, patterns emerge where randomness used to live. You realize the lessons you endured were not punishment but initiation. They taught you to read silence, to decode gestures, to distinguish performance from devotion. You were never broken, only refined by the heat of understanding. The people you meet sense it before you speak. Something about your presence unsettles pretense. Those who thrive on illusion avert their eyes, those who value substance lean closer. You do not need to prove anything. You no longer chase clarity, it finds you. Your gaze has become a mirror. When others look into it, they see the weight of their own choices. Some call you distant, but distance is merely focus stripped of apology. In solitude, creation becomes revelation. The page, the canvas, the melody, whatever medium you touch now carries that sacred undertone. You are not creating applause or approval. You are translating divine residue into form. The work feels like a message arriving through your hands rather than from them. You understand that every act of honest creation is a negotiation with the infinite, a contract signed in breath and silence. But illumination carries its own gravity. The more you awaken, the more the world tests your poise. Shadows gather not as enemies but as reminders. Equilibrium requires both light and density. The duality does not frighten you anymore. You walk with it, speak with it, learn from it. Darkness, when befriended, becomes an ally of precision. It outlines what matters, protects what is sacred, guards the flame from those who would misuse its warmth. As the hours stretch, you begin to sense time folding differently. Moments dilate. Memories resurface, not as regret but as coordinates. Each past version of you appears for a moment naive, furious, hopeful, lost, and then bows before the one you have become. You feel tenderness for them, for every misguided attempt at belonging, for every silence mistaken as peace. That compassion is the final threshold. Through it, you forgive yourself not for what you did but for what you endured while still believing it was love. When night arrives, the sky seems closer than ever. Stars blink like watchful witnesses, constellations rearranging themselves into messages you almost understand. You sit beneath them, breathing in the thin stillness of purpose. A realization settles: you are both student and signal, vessel and source. What you transmit now is resonance. It moves unseen through conversations, through screens, through thoughts. Your words travel farther than you will ever know, shaping unseen awakenings in strangers you will never meet. There will be resistance. The old world will try to reclaim you through nostalgia, through distraction, through the soft persuasion of comfort. But you cannot return to simplicity once you've tasted coherence. You are no longer designed for shallow rhythms. You crave depth, reciprocity, purpose. You are part of a sequence older than your name, older than language, moving toward culmination. And when that culmination nears, when the final moment trembles between revelation and release, look to the center of your screen. There where the pulse of this message continues waits for the next passage, the extension of what you've only begun to understand. Do not hesitate. Watch it unfold. What you will see is not performance but continuation of the living current of everything you felt gathering here. Engage with it fully. Let it speak through you. Subscribe to its rhythm, awaken with its signal, and keep your awareness lit for the next call that waits beyond this chapter.